So one of the things that we hope to do is talk a little bit about ways to find the money. It's always an important component that is a part of what we're trying to do. That's him. Stop. So thank you for coming back and listening again. Before we start talking about money, I want to share something with you. I want to share my philosophy, right? Many people say, well, I got to figure out where the money's coming from. My philosophy is figure out what God's calling you to do. Money is never, ever the problem. Our faith may be, but money is never, ever the problem. So we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to hopefully get up on the slides here in just a moment. We're up? Good. So what if? I want to start out with a what if. And you're not going to answer this question. I just want you to think about this question that is soon to come up. There we go. Couple of questions. What if somebody walked into your church or walked up to you as you were entering your church and said, you know, I'm thinking of making a gift of $10,000. How would you use it to help your community? Could you give them a compelling reason? What if somebody showed up and said to you, hey, we're looking for a place to either hold a wedding or an event. Is your church building or sanctuary available for us? Do you have a way to respond? What if a nonprofit or a community group or somebody else showed up and said, we have this program we're trying to launch and we need some space? How would you react to that? Right? Many of us have not thought about these types of questions. Many of us live in a structure that keeps us from being able to respond to that swiftly. Tell you what, we're going to meet, our trustees meet a month from now. We will talk it over, and we may have some questions, and we'll come back to you, and then in a couple of months later, we'll be able to make a decision. Well, meantime, the event's already happened down the street somewhere else. I want to think about a new perspective, right? So, all right, so I want to talk about two communities. I want to talk about the Christian Church of Wilkinsburg. 75 years ago, there was a gathering right after worship, and they wanted to take a picture for their annual information. And they did. And in the library, there is this beautiful picture of 200 plus people in worship. And when we first gathered, they said, wow, we want to get back to this. We want to have these 200 people in worship. The congregation would often talk about, well, that's not what we used to do, and if we could only fill the pews, we would be faithful. They were looking more at the clubhouse that you heard about earlier. It was an opportunity for social engagement. Their friends were coming to church with them. That's what it was about. Fast forward 75 years. You just heard and saw a presentation about the work of the congregation today. On any given month, we may have 600 people coming through the doors. We don't do it on Sunday morning. We have a worshiping congregation, depending on the Sunday, of 40 to 60. But every day, our doors are open, and somebody's walking in and talking about what they're doing. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the basics. We're going to talk about storytelling. It needs to be visual, needs to be powerful, and it needs to be impactful. We're going to talk about an annual campaign. If you are not having a stewardship season, you're failing God and your congregation. We're going to talk about building a budget. And we're going to talk about needing to find a team of people who are the ones focusing on this. Because if you leave it just to the pastor or just to one other person, you're going to burn them out. So first and foremost, fundraising is always about sharing your story. How do you tell it? It was interesting as Janet asked you to talk about your ministry, you know, the room came alive. So how do you tell your story? On the tables, you'll see a Raise to Raise booklet. There's a couple, I think, at most of the tables, at least one. Every year, we create an annual ministry booklet. In that, we tell stories. Here's some keys to your storytelling. It needs to be effective, and it needs to talk about the impact that you're doing. It needs to be personal and emotional. Right? Don't tell a story from 30 years ago. The story has to be easy to tell, because if I have to read it to you, I'm not connecting to you. It has to be more than one person telling it. The pastor stands up on Sunday morning and tells an effective story, and nobody else takes it out into the community. Who knows about it except those who were already there? You need it to be going out broadly. The stories you tell should always be updated. They cannot be about what you did 75 years ago. They have to be about what you're doing today and tomorrow and what you're doing. In front of me, down on this row, and I'm sure it's hard to see from back there, you'll see some visual boards. This is another way of storytelling. These boards are about the ministry and the nonprofit that I operate, Rebuilding Together. They are conversation starters. People see them, and we have them up, and we take them out when we're doing work, and people say, oh, wait a minute. You guys really create 20-some jobs a year, 30 jobs? Wait, you're generating $32 million of value to our community over the last 4 years? And that's not us making stuff up. It's we work with people who share and tell us this information. And we put it in a format that doesn't answer questions, but generates conversations, right? Here's the thing, and it's really funny because I would have loved to have had Janet say this. So I said to end the story with the request. Ask for what you want. Otherwise, it's just a story. And Janet said, well, it's not always there's a request. And I said, oh, yes, there is. I am a fundraiser, right? Over the last 25 years, I've raised somewhere in the neighborhood of $75 million to go out and help other people, right? Because I love what I do. I don't mind asking, right? But you have to ask for what you need. Otherwise, it's just a story. And it might be a great story. And I may leave, and you may have told me a wonderful ministry you're doing, and leave. And I say, well, I would have liked to have contributed. I wonder why they didn't ask. Give people that opportunity. Once you ask, please do this. Wait for their response. It's the hardest part of asking for money. Years ago, when I was first starting out, I was sitting in a room with 4 other people, a foundation person, and 2 of my board members, and I said, we would love for you to give us $750,000 over a 3-year matching grant for this purpose. And she said, it's a lot of money. And I said, yes, it is. And I stopped. And I had already warned my board members, if you open your mouth, I will throw you out of the room. She said, it's a lot for us, but let me take it back because I think it's a worthy cause. Right? What she wanted and what she asked in her, it's a lot of money, was, well, if it's too much, is there something else you'd rather do? When you take them off the hook, they appreciate it, right? Leave them on the hook. Ask for what you want and let them respond. We're going to move a little bit to an annual campaign. Do you have one? I want to show of hands of who runs in their church a full stewardship campaign annually. Okay. All right, good. About half the room, right? The rest of you go back and start it. You have to do this. Here's why. How are you asking your members? If your members aren't giving, why should I? If you're coming out and asking me to support you, why would I care to support you if you're not even asking the people who are in your congregation? You also should make it personal. It's fine to send out our annual bulletins, but about every 3 years, we try to touch people. It's a way to say thank you also. If you don't ask, people assume you don't have needs, right? So if you never say, this is why I need you, they may say, oh, again, great story. You don't have any needs? If you only ask in a crisis, this is one of my favorites. How many of us get the appeal, whether it's through somebody calling us or on the paper? Oh, we might have to close if you don't respond. You know what? I don't tend to like to respond to those, and because that's the same thing they told me last year. I wonder when they're going to close. So I want my dollars to be effective. I want my dollars to have impact. We are impacting people. We need to share how. Ask people to give their testimony about why they give. It's always interesting to me because most of us, I would guess, in this room probably have great testimonies. But what about the people who are in your congregation who may never get a chance to talk? We shared the booklet, and we had a young man from our community who is kind of relatively new to the church. He's trying to figure out where he needs to be and what his life is about. And he got the booklet at his house, and he came back into the church all excited. And he said, I told my wife, we've got to give. Look at what we're doing over here. We've got to be a part of it. He was excited. These annual things have to be about generating excitement. The last thing that I'll say to you is tithe and education about giving. It's critical. It's a part of the spiritual journey. God has blessed all of us. Are we not giving others the opportunity to do this too? We'll talk a little bit about your budget. Most of us build an annual budget, not based on our mission, not based on the expenses we need to achieve something, but we say, let's do our annual campaign and see how much money we've got to spend. And then we say, let me think, we're going to have to cut some expenses this year. We didn't raise enough, right? My answer to people is you build it wrong. What do you need? Are you having that conversation? Why do you need it? Well, we need it to pay the pastor. Okay, well, that's great. In my household, it's really important. But why do you need it? Why do you have to pay the pastor? Well, so they have a job? No. So that they can be the face of the congregation out in those community meetings. You have to be able to tell the whys. How will you use it? If we give you this, is the question, the what if. If somebody said, I want to give you this for a mission, what would you do with it? If you can't tell them, and you can't answer that question, it makes them think, why should I do it? And will it make a difference? This is especially true, more so for the younger generation, the millennial generation today. They give for causes. They don't give, as many of us might think about, and in my generation, because we were trained, it was important. Stewardship was part of, give your tithe to the church. They're like, I want my dollars to be effective. I want them to make a difference. I want them to be impactful. So again, most of us start with what we have and try to figure out the best way to spend it. I challenge you to go back, figure out what you need, and ask for it. Create a narrative that tells your story. God will provide. We're going to talk about manna in a little bit. In order to do it, though, it's really critical that you build a vision team. As our church, and you saw the pictures, you saw where we'd been, as we began, we really said, what do we need? How are we going to do this? And if we had waited, it's really hard as the executive director of a nonprofit for me to say, well, we've got to go out and raise this much money. I've got a board of directors. We as pastors have congregations. They are our board of directors, so to speak. They're our audience. They have to be a part of it. So build the team, because if it's one person leading it, they burn out. You need a core group of those folks. And most important, I always say to people, find the fearless dreamers. Find those that really want to push the edges of the envelope. That creative and variety of people is really key. You don't want 10 dreamers, because at the end of the day, they'll have a beautiful dream, and then they'll say, wonder why it didn't come true, right? You've got to make sure that as you're building your team that you don't get into those details. Well, we want to start a coffee shop in the church on Saturday evening. Well, wait a minute, where are we going to buy our coffee from? Oh, what kind of coffee are we going to brew? Are we going to have tea? Don't worry about that to start with. Craft the picture. Get those people out there. Get the ideas on the table. Understand that the most important part of it is how do you connect it to something the community needs. Everything has a season. In a little bit, and we talked about all of the things we're doing. We had a great start. We came up with some ideas, and I'll share more about some of those. But they all didn't work, and they all didn't work the same. So we had to change over the years. Most importantly, what's your church's history? What's your DNA and your culture? Build off of it. Our congregation, for well before we came, was the church that was known as the activist church. They were out leading. They were doing youth programming. So we built off of the history of the church. We didn't do it the way they used to, and we didn't allow that to be so. Wait, we didn't do it that way before. That's fine. We have to figure out what we care about as congregations. Finally, it has to build off of a realistic sense of what's available to work with. You can't say, well, we want $1 million if you're a $50,000 budget congregation unless you've got a multimillionaire in your congregation. Make it realistic. Don't dream so big that you get discouraged a few weeks down the road when everything doesn't fall into place. So keep it based in some level of realism. I want to talk about the process we used at our church. So we went out and we looked and we evaluated a building, and we looked at the community to see where we had our capacity and the community had needs. We looked at our building, which was built back at the turn of the century in the 1900s. It was a great building, but we had a lot of space that wasn't being utilized. And so we began to talk about how can we better utilize that. We looked at, and you saw the youth violence and you heard the story, and we knew that youth services were critical and there was limited amount of youth services. We also knew that as a congregation, we couldn't go out and raise millions of dollars to start them. So we said, well, who's doing them? And here's a key part for you: effectively. Pay attention. The folks you need to bring in and partner with need to be effective. And look in your own congregation. Do you understand who's sitting in your pews? Do you understand what resources are available to you? In our congregation, we had a number of folks who were already working for other nonprofits. If a person who works for us in our pew works for a nonprofit and they go in and say to their director, our church is thinking about doing this and I know we need more space, or I know we've been talking about we want to do more in this community, guess what? The doors open much faster than, hi, this is Steve. I'm calling you because I understand you guys are doing mental health services in the community of Wilkinsburg, and we're wondering, well, let me see, I'm not sure who you need to talk to, right? So use the connections. The other thing is we recruited the members of this team. We looked for what was there. We had people who loved the mission camp. Our church has been taking kids out on mission camps for years and years. We knew that was there. We had the retreat and writing ministry, and on your tables you'll see a brochure about the retreats and writing. You'll also see books that have been written. We went through a Lenten season on forgiveness, and one of the other people in the church said, wow, that's so cool and powerful. We need to get that written up. And so the church blessed Janet with the time to write it, not to say, well, gee, you need to do that on top of everything else you're doing. They said, no, we want to create this writing retreat so you can get away and craft this. The other is we had a couple of folks in our church with musical talents, and they really cared about youth. And so they created a concert that raises about $3,000 every year to run our summer program. And we had a couple who loved to cook and said, wow, could we do catering? And so from that, here's what happened. Our church made the decision as we were looking forward to, we saw the struggles coming. We knew that there were some things that were going to get very tight if we didn't start thinking about it today, because if you wait until the crisis happens, you're too late. What do you need and where are you going is really important. So we built a 3-year strategy. We were very fortunate. We had people, saints of the past, who had left us sizable gifts that created the opportunity for us to look at our future. So we, as a congregation, voted to take $50,000 of that funding and create a seed funding to see if we could generate revenue to replace it and to stay in full-time ministry. So we looked at, and with that group of people, we came up with 5 things. Remember our 5 fingers as disciples. So we came up with mission camps. We came up with a retreat and writing ministry. We came up with how to better use the building for the community. Fundraisers, including the music concert and catering. And after that work was done, we looked at them all, and some of them took off. Rebuilding Together, which I run, was growing rapidly, and they were looking at how we could increase. And we got a call from Idaho, right? Now, for those who are geographically challenged, as my daughter, Idaho is way out west, and Pittsburgh is out here more towards the East Coast. Why did Idaho call Pittsburgh and say, we want to bring a mission group in the winter? And we were like, and so they came with the gentleman who was the head of the program, and he said, we heard about you guys because you did a mission camp with AmeriCorps members, and one of our graduates came back out and said, you need to go to Pittsburgh. They are doing some powerful work in the housing field. So they called us, and so the mission, God provided. And so we were thinking about it. They contacted us. We figured out how to make it happen. The retreat and writing ministry has been slower to develop. We tell Janet to write a book every couple of weeks, but she's not paying up with it. So, but we've made some time. So those books are starting to come and be revised. And the books that are on your table are for sale, by the way, cheap plug. Those go back into the work of the church. So the profits from that fund all of the youth ministry that we're doing. We also then began to look at retreat leadership. Every year, I think when Janet did her thing, you talked about a little bit about how we were moving forward and doing the work. So here we are, and we were looking at how to do this. The key thing in that is folks were so powerfully touched by the retreat. They were like, you need to be a retreat leader. And again, the congregation made the decision that if that could be developed, they wanted to support that. It wasn't about our church needing to grow deeper spiritually. It was about sharing God's word across the region and other areas. We also did the fundraisers, as we mentioned, and catering. So those were the types of things that we began focusing in on. I'm thrilled to say that what happened is after those first 3 years, we put half of the money back because we didn't need it all because we were generating. And God blessed us, manna from heaven. We got a gift from a family who was previously involved with the church that very few even knew, of $60,000. Half we put back in to bring everything back, and half we use to seed the next round. So now we're going to move to how you can do this. So I want to talk first about fun in the fundraising, right? So first, I don't know if people know where money comes from, so we're going to spend a little bit of education. The largest source of charitable giving in the U.S. in 2015, at $268 billion, 71% comes from individuals. In addition, the bequest of $28.72 billion for 9%. So 4 out of 5 dollars that are donated in this country come from individuals. Secondarily, in 2015, volunteers, the majority of the charitable dollars go to, guess where? Religion. Isn't it amazing? Nearly 1 out of 3 dollars is given to religious organizations. What does that say? First and foremost, that 4 out of 5 dollars comes from individuals. Who's sitting in your pews? Individuals. Secondly, that 1 out of 3 dollars always goes to religious. We are sitting on a gold mine, folks. All we have to do is ask. Okay? I also want to very quickly talk about volunteering. So 62 million Americans volunteer, 25% of the adult population. The top 4 national volunteer activities are, what do you think? Isn't it amazing? Right there at the top, fundraising and selling items to raise money. Food collection and distribution, almost always a community need. General labor or transportation of that I'm extremely grateful for, as you can see from our housing ministry, and tutoring and teaching. The top 4 volunteer areas, wow, surprise again, it's about people who want to be connected to their religious organizations and institutions. So I want to talk to you today about some alternative options that you may have. So first, you need to ask yourself a question, and I believe it might be the last day of the assembly. In the tracts, there is a thing about church or nonprofits. Is it really time to start a nonprofit? Is collaboration in how you're doing it with a specific focus? Or can your church effectively raise money by itself? There's grants and business gifts. What do they mean? We're going to talk a little bit about building usage. We're going to talk about planned giving, crowdfunding, individual donors, and manna from heaven. So most of us think grants and business gifts. If we could just get this big grant. Remember a few minutes ago, 4 out of 5 dollars comes from individual people, not from foundations. Grants first and foremost, and I want you to hear this, they're very challenging for individual congregations. Most foundations believe that we as a congregation only want their money to proselytize, and they will not give for that purpose. There are a few that do, but they're minimum. They're more likely then to come from family foundations or businesses in your community that you have a connection to. Businesses tend to be generous if you ask. Most of us don't even think about the businesses in our community to ask them. Maybe you're doing a spaghetti supper and you say to them, would you consider an ad for $250 and we will fix placemats up? Doesn't have to be big, but think about ways to ask. The other thing about grants, they're very short term and they tend to be pretty restrictive, and most of the time they don't cover operating costs. And where do we in the church mostly need money? Buildings and staff. And most foundations think, well, that's operating cost. The most important part of grant writing, Janet and I always have this fun little thing. I say, if you're going to write a grant, and they say, tell me what your mission is. My answer is, my mission is, or tell me about the community you serve. The community we serve. I reiterate their language a lot of times. They, grant foundation people, if you're a grant and foundation person, I'm going to apologize in advance. They want to hear themselves talk. They're philanthropists. They've got a lot of money to give you. They want you to think that's valuable. So tell them what they want to hear. I'm shameless, guys. I'm sorry. It's the best way to act. Tell them what they want to hear. Repeat their question as part of your answer. And do not, under any circumstances, say, well, that's not what I want to answer. I want them to know this about me. They want to know the answers to their questions. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of opportunities. If you Google or Bing or whoever you use as your search engine, put in churches and fundraising, and you will come up with lots. The best one out there is the foundationcenter.org. It's a national database of every foundation that exists, if you're going to do it. The key here is you go to your library and do it for free because they're not giving it away. It is an expensive tool. Most public libraries have access to it online or a hard copy of it. There's also grantwatch.com. That's a site where you can look at upcoming. They're going to ask you to become a member, but you can see a few things on there now. Grantspace.org is another one. Christianvolunteering.org. So there are places like that that are out there. Just type it in. You will get plenty of opportunities to look at where they're at. But I will tell you and remind you, 4 out of $5 come from your individuals. How do you use your building? How do you develop your property? It's really a good source of revenue, but it does take commitment from staff, and it usually requires some investment on the front end. If I want to come and utilize a permanent space in your building, I need it to do what I want it to do. So unless you have someone with experience to negotiate that kind of stuff for you, go talk to a commercial broker, a real estate broker in your community, especially if there's somebody in your church who's connected to them, and say, look, we have a lot of space here. We're trying to figure out how to partner and meet the needs. Are you able to help us? Normally they take a percentage of the rental, but if you've got the space that's sitting vacant, as we did, figure out how to better use it. Your best option, though, is to partner. Do you have folks that are connected? As I shared earlier, we had people who were in the nonprofit world. We had youth people sitting around the table through our sanctuary project. Here's the key. Don't just take what comes to your door. Partner with what's important. Connect it to your church. That is really critical. And once they're in, stay connected. Don't just have them be a tenant in the basement over here. But if they're a Head Start program, ask them, oh, you need volunteers? Could some of our church members come? Could we do something for your parents once a month? Could we have breakfast? What can you do as a church to connect to it? If your church owns land or a building and it's in a premium location, one of the things you might want to do is talk to how you can leverage that and develop it. And our own Disciples Church Extension is a good source of that for assistance. Yeah? They have professionals who are willing to come out and work with you to try to help you become more effective. How many of you know the Christian Church Foundation? I want to show of hands, right? That's sad that there are not every hand in this room went up. They have tremendous resources to help us with planned giving and people who are out there. During your annual stewardship season, do you talk about including the church in the will? Do people in your congregation know about charitable contributions that they might have today and how they could be charitable remainder trust that pay out over time and they get tax benefits? What about educating people about purchasing life insurance? We have a couple of folks in our church that struggle, but they wanted to make sure that if and when they pass, their tithe remains, so they've taken out life insurance policies and pay a meager sum. It's not huge, but at the end of their life, they want to be able to create something. That's their legacy. What are the legacies of the church? Okay, I want to talk quickly about crowdfunding. It works. It really, truly works, but it is hard. It is challenging. You have to have somebody constantly updating it. It's based on who you know and your willingness to ask. So if you go create a wonderful story and put it up on IndieGoGo and don't share it, they're not going to give and share it for you. It starts with, hey, let me send it out to my 10 or 100 Facebook friends, or thousands for those who actually use it. I might have 10 and I'm not sure if I know any of them. So, but there's GoFundMe, there's IndieGoGo, and Kickstarter. The other thing that I want to remind you of, individual donors. Make it bite-size, right? Help people understand that, yeah, I have a need for $5,000 to start something. But 50 of us can do 100, or 100 of us can do 50. Break it up and tell people their impact. Make it a challenge. I'm going to give $10, and I want 9 people to give $10 because we want to raise $100 to help. Use your friends in it. We kept open 36-week program codenamed Saturday because we told people they needed $85 a week to serve 10 to 20 people in our church. It was amazing how many people stepped up and paid that quickly. We had one person say, I'll take 4 weeks, right off the bat. People you know are most likely to give. Again, you have to ask. Lastly, here's the key. It's manna from heaven. It's manna, there we go. Manna from heaven just arrived. Put your mission first. Your funds will follow. If you know what you're doing and you talk passionately about it, it will be there. How do you tell effective, impactful stories? You don't want to tell the story about something that happened 20 years ago. You want to talk about what's happening today. Trust in God for enough. What is manna? It's not enough for tomorrow and the next day and the next day. It's enough. Make those requests prayerful. Prior to me ever going in and asking foundations and corporations and those for money, we pray. We ask for God, if it's meant to be, open the doors. Ask, ask, and ask again. Ask and it will be given you. Search and you will find. Knock and the door will be open for you. Comes from Matthew. We're not doing something that's new. We're doing something that's scripturally based. And if you do so, you will become effective and be able to raise more and different kinds of funds, but you have to be willing to tell your story.